Winter riding means wet trails, wild rides and endless cleaning, but it's not all doom and gloom. It can actually provide some of the best riding that you're gonna do all year, I promise. So in this video today, I'm gonna look at how to tackle riding in the wet conditions like an absolute pro. Before we even drop into the trails, then let's talk bike setup, because there are some things that you can definitely do to your bike, and the pros definitely do, to make it a little bit more winter capable. And we're going to kick things off with the tires, your point of contact, or hopefully your only point of contact with the ground. Now, you can get much more specific winter tires, which I would highly recommend. They're going to bite into the mud a lot better, and they're going to shed that mud as well. So rather than clogging up and getting all gunked and losing traction, they are going to give you as much grip as you can possibly get. Let's have a quick look at the tires I've got on my bike then, because there are two very different tires on here because, well, the last time I used this, it was very dry. The back tire is a quite tightly knit, fast rolling, summer perfect tire. Up front, I've got a much more aggressively treaded tire. The knobbles on it are further apart, they're angled differently, and what that's gonna do is bite into the mud, like I said, but also shed it as well. And the compound's really soft as well, so actually that softer compound tire is gonna mold itself to the ground, the rocks, the roots, and all kinds of things to give you as much grip as possible. When it comes to pressure, sometimes I actually drop them a touch lower as well. Because you're not looking for that rolling speed, that outright just ability to just cruise along because it's wetter, it's muddier, you'll drop the pressures ever so slightly to again help with that added traction, especially when it comes to things like off-camber roots and rocks and stuff like that, where your tires really want to bite as hard as they can. Careful you don't go too soft though. If you run inserts, this could be a great help. If you go too soft, you will still get punctures. When it comes to the suspension then, you might want to think about dropping a few PSI out of it as well, if you are running air shocks, of course. What that's going to do is allow it just to sit a little further into the travel, a little squatter to the ground, and allow your body to force even more weight and pressure through the pedals, through the tires, and into the ground to give you as much grip as possible. There are some pre-ride or non-setup changes you can do as well to help shed and battle away the mud and slop of that wet weather riding. Silicone spray is a great thing to apply to your bike. It basically gives a film on your bike and really prevents and prolongs the mud sticking to it. Be careful though, get that stuff around your discs and you ain't slowing down. Also, I mean, there's not one here, but a mud guard. I got caught unawares today on this muddy ride and I don't have one on, but a mud guard is almost an essential for keeping some vision clear, to be able to see where you're going. Have you ever noticed how the pros and those top end riders, they seem to glide almost effortlessly through the mud, making it look far simpler than what it really is? Well, when it comes to body position, they make some subtle and fine tweaks here compared to when they were riding in the dry to really make the most of what they're doing and getting through the mud as efficiently as possible. And here is how it changes. Now, when it comes to riding in the dry, we all kind of know that fairly aggressive neutral riding position, so a slight bend in the elbows and in the legs, head forwards, looking at where you're going. That's kind of, like I said, your neutral riding position. Well, when it comes to riding in the mud and the wet, what you'll see a lot of the time is body weight will be shifted ever so slightly back a little further over the saddle, and heels are going to be dropped. By doing this, it actually lifts the weight off the front end a touch and stops it pushing and slipping out on roots and corners and things like that. You've got to be careful though. If you start going full send mode and you're all back here, the front's going to go too light and it is just going to affect your steering and blow out as well. There is a fine line. It's not all about going down in the wet though. For those of us that like to climb uphill in the wet, well, it's a similar scenario actually to those body position tweaks that you're going to make when going down, because let's assume it's very slippery. To get as much traction through the rear wheel, you'll find that you're going to shift your butt back on the saddle just so that you've got a little bit more weight driving through the rear wheel to give it as much grip as possible. Again, you don't want to go back too far, because when you're going uphill, if you shift your weight back, the front's going to go very light, making steering quite tricky. But talking of steering, try and sort of keep yourself nice and planted in the saddle, and you'll see the pros are sort of shifting their body weight, using their hips around on their saddle to move it left and right and actually be able to steer that way rather than sort of physically turning the bars as much, because like I said, they got their butt back. It does make the front end a little bit lighter. Pros will keep things pretty loosey-goosey when it comes to hard charging in the mud. And that's because, like me trying to walk down here, track conditions are so unpredictable that things can change literally in the blink of an eye. Try to stay all loosey-goosey then when riding over really slippery, muddy, loose, horrible minging ground, because if you ride all tense and stiffened up, it means the bike is going to be sort of just basically bouncing off of things. It's not going to be able to move around nice and fluidly underneath you to try and sort of almost move with the contours of the ground. If you're all tense and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to die. It's just, oh my God! The bike's just going to go doosh, oh, you've fallen off. Whereas actually, if you're just sort of nice and fluid in your body movements, you're able to move the bike around easier. The bike can dance around underneath you easier through the mud, over the wet roots, the wet rocks, and you stand a lot greater chance of staying on top of it. Pros will absolutely boss it when it comes to line choice in wet weather. And that's because they spend ages looking for the quickest, safest, fastest line, or a combination of all of the above. Much like this section I'm on here, we've got a very direct, straight through the middle line, which is pretty rooty and bumpy, as you can see. There's a very wide, lot less rooty, smoother line around the outside, and there's a really high line, but actually it's pretty filthy up there because it's still covered in loam and pine needles and stuff like that, so grip's compromised. But choosing the right line can make a huge difference between getting through a section or, well, struggling and looking like an absolute joey. Try to avoid lines which have got huge, muddy, boggy sections in them, because they're just gonna, quite literally bog you and slow you down. So you might come in really fast, hit it and lose all that speed and not actually be able to make it through the rest of the section. Likewise, if it's an extremely rooty section, much like to my left there, that off-camber root garden, well, that isn't even worth touching in the wet, because you're going to hit one of those and it's more than likely just going to wash out straight from under you. So actually, in this case, the most direct, although be it bumpiest, is the fastest and best line to take, because you're hitting all the roots square on in the wet weather. You're in a dead straight line, and it's the most direct way through there as well. If you're riding in truly biblical conditions and it's wetter than an otter's pocket out there, well then actually the wettest line can be the safest and fastest. Think about it, if you've got streams running down your trail, it generally means actually it's probably worn through and quite hard packed underneath. A lot of the times if you try and go on the outskirts of these, it's really soft and boggy. So sometimes the wettest route can be the most safest and direct. You're just gonna have to play it by ear. Braking can change hugely when the conditions do get wet and sloppy, and the pros will change their braking style ever so slightly to suit this. So my first top tip is to be gentle and smooth on the brakes. So try to just pull them ever so nicely, a lot more modulation, rather than just banging them on and potentially locking wheels up. Locked up wheels are slippery wheels, and you don't want that. And also just nice and gentle and smooth on that lever action as well. Real careful on the biting point. You've really got to modulate and feather them nicely. Braking distances can change when it is wet as well. So if you come hard charging full gas into a section that you ride a million times over in the summer, you're going to find that actually it's going to take you longer to slow down, because as soon as you start to say lock up the back wheel and then real nice and smoothly on that front, as hopefully you're doing, well, there's just less grip on the ground, so you're just going to slide for further. So braking points can become ever so slightly earlier. So take that into note next time you are riding in the wet. And actually, they can become slightly longer as well, because when your brakes get wet and muddy, they almost take a sort of a split second, if you like, to actually clear the pads and the disc of any mud and residue and water on there, and then really bite in after that. Try to avoid braking then on wet off-camber rocks and roots. If you do feel like you need to pull the brakes on them, try and be very careful again. But if you were to lock the wheel up on a big old off-camber route like that, well then chances are that you are going down. Try to slow down before the section to then carry the speed and the momentum to skip over the obstacles, and then you'll keep a good exit speed as well. Right, there we have it then. Some absolute top tips for how to ride in the wet like a full-on pro. Hopefully you found them helpful. If you've got any more tips of your own, why not let me know down in the comments? And well, that's it, I'm out of here. Why not give us a little like, thumbs up and a subscribe? I'm gonna get my breath back and I'll catch you next time. Cheers for watching everyone, see you later.